Wo kunrinyen, onti se bi ajatin fa keke.
Mase anian, mama. Orope ede Yoruba ni Spanish. Koni molai.
Ní kété tí ogun bàbá bàdí ti wá pátápátá, a ò ní fi ọkùnrin Nàìjíríà yìí sí àyíká mọ́. A ò ní fi ọkùnrin Nàìjíríà yìí sí àyíká mọ́. Mo gbọ́ ohun gbogbo. Ní gbogbo ìgbà tí ẹ̀rọ pẹnukọ́lẹ́bọ̀ yìí.
The room doesn't just go quiet, it goes dead. The smile on Mama Gloria's face freezes solid. Darius's mouth falls open. No words come out. The folder sitting quietly beside Otto's chair is about to end this family's 15-year lie in front of everyone they invited to celebrate. My name is Otto Thompson. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. If you work hard enough, and you stay patient enough, people will eventually see who you really are. That belief got me through a childhood without parents, through 14-hour shifts pouring concrete under the Texas sun, and into a marriage I thought was finally going to be my reward. I was wrong about that last part. 6 months ago, at a family dinner in Sugar Land, Texas, my wife leaned toward her mother and switched into Yoruba, the language my late grandmother spent 11 patient years teaching me back home in 3rd Ward, Houston. She thought I didn't understand a single word. She was wrong. And that one small mistake, spoken so easily over a plate of jollof rice and fried plantain, would end up unraveling nearly 2 years of lies. Here's what nobody at that table knew. I had already been listening for months. I had already started recording, and sitting quietly in a folder on my phone was 31 minutes and 17 seconds of conversation that was about to change every one of our lives. Before we get into it, sit with that number for a second. 31 minutes. That's all it took to undo 2 years of somebody else's plan, once the man they thought couldn't understand them decided to speak their language back. It started on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of evening that never makes it into anybody's story until later, when you look back and realize it was the last normal day you had. I was driving home from a job site off Alameda Road, my old Ford F-150 rattling over the same potholes it had for 9 years, the radio playing low. My boots were caked in drywall dust. My back ached in that familiar way that told me I'd earned my paycheck. On the passenger seat sat a bag of plantain chips from the market on Emancipation Avenue, Layla's favorite, the ones she said reminded her of her father's kitchen before he passed. I always picked some up on Tuesdays. Small things like that, I figured, were what kept a marriage warm. 3rd Ward at 6 in the evening has its own rhythm. Kids on bikes cutting across the block before the streetlights come on. The smell of somebody's barbecue drifting over a fence. An old man on his porch raising 2 fingers off his rocking chair as I passed, the same wave he'd been giving me since I bought my little brick house 9 years back. I waved back. I remember thinking, this is what a good life looks like. Simple. Earned. Mine. My grandmother, Nana Aisha, used to tell me that a man's peace is only as strong as his blindness to what's really happening around him. I didn't understand her back then. I understood her by the end of that Tuesday. I grew up in that house with her after I lost both my parents before I turned 9. Nana Aisha was born in Ibadan, Nigeria, and she raised me the only way she knew how, half in English, half in Yoruba, weaving proverbs into everything from breakfast to bedtime. She'd sit me down at that same kitchen table, flour still on her hands from the meat pies she sold to half of 3rd Ward, and drill me on verb tenses like it was scripture. "This is your second pair of eyes, Otto," she told me once, tapping my temple. One day, somebody is going to think you can't see them. That's when you'll need this the most. I thought she was just keeping tradition alive. I didn't know she was arming me. I met Layla Adebayo at a cousin's graduation party a little over 2 years ago. She had a laugh that filled up a room, and for a man who grew up mostly quiet, mostly alone, that laugh felt like sunlight. Her family had money, real estate, import business, a father who'd built something out of nothing after coming from Lagos in the 80s. I had calloused hands and a construction license. I never once felt like I belonged in her world. But Layla made belonging feel like it didn't require money. For a while, I believed her. We married 18 months ago in a small ceremony her mother, Gloria, insisted on hosting at her house in Sugar Land. The kind of house with a circular driveway and a chandelier in the foyer that Mama Gloria polished herself twice a month. I brought Layla into my home in 3rd Ward, fixed up the kitchen with my own hands, replaced the porch light, planted hibiscus by the mailbox because she said it reminded her of home. Every Sunday, I drove the 25 miles out to Sugar Land for family dinner, brought dessert, cleared the table, refilled Mama Gloria's water glass before she had to ask. That particular Tuesday wasn't even a Sunday dinner. It was smaller, just me, Layla, and her mother, catching up after Mama Gloria's hip surgery. I remember clearing plates, walking toward the kitchen with my arms full, when I heard Mama Gloria's voice drop behind me, easy and unguarded, sliding into Yoruba the way people do when they're certain no one in the room can follow. Look at that man, working like a dog. A pause. Layla's soft laugh, answering her mother in the same language. Thank God he doesn't understand a word of Yoruba. I stood there at the sink, water running over a plate I'd already rinsed twice, and I let my face stay exactly as calm as it had been 30 seconds earlier. I turned around with a smile. I asked if anyone wanted more sweet tea. I did not tell them that my grandmother had spent 11 years making sure I would understand every single word. That night, driving home down the Southwest Freeway with the windows cracked and the city lights blurring past, I didn't feel angry yet. Not really. I felt something quieter and colder settle into my chest. The specific stillness of a man who has just learned exactly where he stands in a room he thought he belonged in. If you've ever sat at a table where the people who were supposed to love you started speaking a language they assumed you'd never understand, you already know there are 2 kinds of pain in that moment. The pain of what they said, and the much sharper pain of realizing how long they must have been saying it. Stay with me, because in the next part, you'll hear exactly what my wife said with a champagne glass in her hand, thinking the day she got everything would be the happiest day of her life. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't confront anyone for a long time after that, actually. Instead, I did the only thing my grandmother ever really taught me how to do well. I waited. And I watched. The next morning, I bought a small digital voice recorder from a pawn shop on Wheeler Avenue. Paid cash, $42. I started carrying it in my shirt pocket every time we visited Sugar Land. I kept doing everything exactly the way I'd always done it. I mowed Mama Gloria's lawn on the weekends her gardener took off. I fixed the loose railing on her back porch. I brought Layla coffee in bed on Saturday mornings before she was even awake. If a man wants to know what people really think of him, he doesn't announce that he's paying attention. He simply becomes very good at seeming like he isn't. 3 weeks later, at another Sunday dinner, I was refilling the ice bucket in the kitchen when I heard Layla's voice drifting from the dining room, low and certain, back in Yoruba again. He's just a tool. When the real money comes through, we cut him loose completely. Mama Gloria answered in the same language, something about patience, about not spoiling things before the estate cleared. I stood in that kitchen with a bag of ice sweating in my hand, and something in me went very still and very clear. My wife wasn't just embarrassed by where I came from, she was managing me. like a project with a deadline. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters. In that moment, I didn't feel rage the way people expect. I felt grief. Grief for the version of my marriage I'd built in my head over 18 months. The porch light I'd installed, the hibiscus by the mailbox, all of it suddenly rearranging itself into something much colder in my memory. But grief, I've learned, can sit right next to patience without putting it out. Here's something I need to explain clearly, because it matters for everything that comes next. Layla's father, Chief Raymond Adebayo, had passed away 14 months earlier, about 4 months after our wedding, from a sudden heart attack that shocked the whole family. I'd only known him a short while, but he was the one person in that family who ever looked at me like I already belonged in it. 6 months before he died, we sat together on his back patio in Sugar Land, and he told me, plain and simple, that he liked how I fixed things instead of just talking about fixing them. I hadn't understood at the time why that comment stuck with me so long. I would understand it soon enough. After Chief Raymond passed, his estate, an import-export business worth just over $2 million, along with a modest family trust meant to fund scholarships for Nigerian-American students in Houston, went into probate at the Harris County Courthouse. Layla's brother, Darius, took over managing the paperwork. 14 months later, that estate still hadn't cleared, and I was about to find out why. I found out by accident, the way most truths get found. Darius left a folder on the kitchen counter one Sunday while he stepped out for a phone call. Inside was a draft letter addressed to the probate court requesting the removal of a name from the trust's list of co-trustees. The name being removed was mine. I didn't even know I'd been named. It turned out Chief Raymond had quietly amended his estate documents sometime after meeting me, naming me, his daughter's husband, as a co-trustee overseeing the scholarship portion of the estate. $15,000 a year, distributed to students at Texas Southern University and the University of Houston. He'd never told me. I think he wanted it to be a surprise. Or maybe he simply ran out of time. Darius and Mama Gloria wanted me removed before I ever found out, because I overheard Mama Gloria say plainly, in Yoruba, that same afternoon, "He isn't our blood. He shouldn't have any say in our family's inheritance." I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I smiled at Darius when he came back inside. I asked him how his golf game was going. That night, in my garage in 3rd Ward, alone with a single work lamp hanging over my tool bench, I sat down and listened to the recording again, my hands steady on the little device. I thought about Chief Raymond, about that patio conversation, and I whispered out loud to nobody, "Patience is the strongest weapon there is." But patience without evidence is just silence. So I got serious. I found a family law attorney, a woman named Patricia Renner, with an office on Post Oak Boulevard in Houston's Uptown District, walking distance from the Galleria. I told her everything, the recordings, the folder, the timeline. She pulled records from the Harris County Clerk's office and found something that made her go quiet for a long moment before she looked up at me. A quitclaim deed, filed 8 months into my marriage, transferring partial ownership of my 3rd Ward house into a family trust controlled by Mama Gloria and Darius. My signature was on it. I had never signed anything of the kind. Underneath that, a renunciation of trustee document, drafted and ready to file, also bearing my forged signature. A document that would have quietly erased my name from Chief Raymond's estate before I ever knew it had been there. Patricia told me plainly what that meant under Texas law. Forgery on a recorded deed and forgery on estate documents intended for a probate court weren't just family disagreements. They were felonies. She also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd flagged something else buried deep in the probate file. A sealed personal note, handwritten, addressed to me. She wanted more time to verify it before she showed me. I didn't think much of it that night. I would think about nothing else a few weeks later. Patricia started building the paper trail while I kept living my normal life. mowing lawns, fixing railings, bringing home plantain chips on Tuesdays, letting them believe every single day that I understood nothing at all. There's a particular kind of loneliness in smiling at people while you're quietly building the case that will end things with them. I won't pretend it didn't cost me something. Some nights I sat in that garage until midnight, the smell of sawdust and old motor oil around me, wondering if I was becoming someone harder than the man Nana Aisha raised. But then I'd think about that folder, about the words, "just a tool," about a man named Otto who worked 14-hour days and never once complained, being quietly written out of a family he'd given everything to. And I'd remind myself, I wasn't building a weapon, I was building the truth. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one at midnight in an empty garage. By early spring, Patricia had almost everything she needed: the recordings, the forged deed, the renunciation letter, bank statements showing money already being moved. There was one more discovery coming, one that would prove this had never just been about money after the wedding. It had started before I ever said, "I do." That moment came on a Sunday in April, at a dinner Mama Gloria was hosting for nearly 20 relatives. A celebration, she called it, for the estate finally clearing probate. She had no idea what she was actually about to celebrate. For months, Otto smiled, cooked, and mowed lawns while secretly recording the very family he called his own, never saying a word, never warning them, never giving them a chance to stop. Was that patience, or was it its own kind of deception? Comment yes if silence was the only real weapon a good man had left. Comment no if a good man owed them the truth the very first night he heard it. Mama Gloria's dining room in Sugarland was full that Sunday. Nearly 20 people crowded around 2 tables pushed together. Gold-rimmed china she only brought out for occasions. The smell of jollof rice and fried plantain thick in the air. Aunts I'd met maybe twice. Cousins visiting from Lagos. Darius's business partner and his wife. Candles flickering along the centerpiece. Mama Gloria stood at the head of the table, in a deep blue agbada with gold embroidery, a champagne flute already in her hand, tapping it lightly with a spoon before anyone had even finished eating. "A toast," she announced, beaming at the room, "to the closing of my late husband's estate and to this family finally getting what it has earned." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, standing near the kitchen doorway with a serving spoon still in my other hand, because I'd just brought out a second helping of stew. I smiled the way I always smiled at that table, patient, pleasant, invisible. For about 20 more minutes, dinner went the way it always went. I refilled water glasses. I complimented the food. Layla told a story about a client at her marketing firm, and everyone laughed at the right moments. I stood, cleared plates, and carried a stack toward the kitchen. And that's when Mama Gloria and Layla slid back into Yoruba, low and easy, the way people do when they've done it 100 times without consequence. Mama Gloria said it first, not even bothering to lower her voice much. "Look at that man, still working like a dog pulling a cart. Thank God he doesn't understand a word of Yoruba we're saying." Layla laughed, soft and sweet, the same laugh that once felt like sunlight to me, answering her mother in the same language. "Don't worry, he thinks Yoruba is Spanish. All he knows is work and silence. We can say anything, he'll never know." Darius, 3 seats down, laughed loud enough that a few relatives glanced over, adding his own line in Yoruba. "Once Dad's estate is fully ours, we're done keeping this Nigerian around." The whole end of the table laughed, certain I was too far away, too busy, too simple to catch a word of it. I stood at the kitchen doorway for exactly 4 seconds. I want you to picture that. 4 seconds, with a stack of dirty plates balanced against my forearm, the smell of jollof rice still warm in the air, 20 people at a table I'd spent 18 months earning a seat at. My knuckles went white against the edge of the top plate. I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the sound of a door finally closing on a version of my life I'd been trying too hard to hold on to. I set the plates down. I walked back to the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I heard everything, I said. And I said it in Yoruba, my accent clean and unhurried, exactly the way Nana Aisha had drilled into me over 11 years at a kitchen table in 3rd Ward. Every single time you thought I couldn't hear you. The room didn't just go quiet. It went dead. The specific, total silence of 20 people realizing all at once that they'd made a terrible miscalculation. Layla's champagne flute tilted in her fingers, catching the candlelight before she steadied it. Her face drained of color so fast, I actually watched it happen, like watching a light switch flip. Mama Gloria's spoon clattered against her plate. Darius half rose out of his chair, mouth open, no words coming out yet. I hadn't planned to speak in that exact moment. I'd told myself I'd wait for more proof, more time. But something about hearing Darius laugh, so certain of my smallness, snapped a patience I'd been rationing for months. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was chasing proof that I'd once been more than useful to somebody. What scared me most wasn't losing the marriage. It was the possibility that I'd never really belonged anywhere at all, and that this family had simply confirmed what I'd feared since I was 8 years old, and suddenly alone. I kept going, still in Yoruba, still steady, repeating their own words back to them, word for word. Just a tool, a husband who understands nothing, cut loose once the real money comes through. I let those words sit in the room exactly as long as they'd sat in my chest for the last several months. Darius finally found his voice. What did you just say? His English came out ragged, disbelieving. I switched to English myself, calm, deliberate, looking straight at him. I said I heard every word. Not just tonight, every dinner, for months. A dog pulling a cart, a tool, he'll never know. I turned toward Mama Gloria. I know exactly what this family has thought of me since the day I sat down at this table. Somebody's fork hit a plate. An aunt near the far end whispered something to her husband, her eyes wide with the kind of second-hand embarrassment that spreads through a room like heat. Layla's voice cracked when it finally came out. Otto, how long have you... Why didn't you say anything? I looked at my wife for a long moment before I answered. And I want you to understand, there was no triumph in me right then, just a tired, aching clarity. Because I wanted to know who you really were, once you thought I couldn't understand you. I let that land. I wanted to see what kind of family I actually married into. After I lost my parents at 8 years old and spent my whole childhood wondering what it would feel like to finally belong somewhere, I needed to know if this was real or if I was just useful. Mama Gloria tried to recover first, her chin lifting the way it always did when she wanted the room back under her control. Don't listen to him, she said, snapping back into Yoruba, loud enough for the whole table, but her voice was shaking now, and everyone at that table had already heard enough English and Yoruba both to know exactly what had just happened. I reached into my shirt pocket and set my phone on the table, screen up, and pressed play. Mama Gloria's own voice filled the dining room, clear, unmistakable, recorded weeks earlier in that very kitchen, every word of it in Yoruba. Look at that man, still working like a dog, followed by Layla's laugh, followed by Darius's voice, gloating about cutting me loose once the estate cleared. Nobody at that table moved. A cousin near the end put her hand over her mouth. An uncle shook his head slowly, staring down at his plate like he couldn't look up. Layla's champagne flute finally slipped from her fingers and hit the tablecloth, wine spreading dark across the white linen like something spilling that could never be put back in the glass. Otto, please! Her voice broke completely now, You don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying this family. I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I let her see exactly how tired I was. No, I said quietly. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just done being the only one at this table who didn't know what everyone else already agreed on. Mama Gloria stood up so fast, her chair scraped backward and nearly tipped. Her hands were trembling around the edge of the tablecloth. And that's when I reached down beside my chair, picked up the folder I'd left there before dinner even started, and set it on the table next to my phone. There's more, I said, and I think everyone here deserves to see it. If you've ever watched a room full of people realize all at once that the quiet man they'd underestimated had been 3 steps ahead of them the entire time, stay close, because what came next was so much worse than what they'd just heard. Mama Gloria's hand shot out toward the folder before I could open it. This is absurd, she said, her voice too loud, too fast, the way people talk when they're trying to outrun the truth instead of face it. He's making this up. He's jealous of everything we've built. This man has always resented this family's success. A few relatives glanced at each other, uncertain now, the way people get when a story they'd already decided to believe suddenly has a second version standing right in front of them. Layla was still shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth, but she found enough breath to add her own voice to her mother's. Otto isn't like this, she said to the table, to nobody, to everyone. He's twisting things. He wants attention. Darius reached for my phone on the table, maybe thinking he could stop the recording, delete it, undo the last 90 seconds somehow. I didn't raise my voice. I only said a few words to him, in Yoruba, low and even. Don't touch it. He froze with his hand halfway across the table. Something about hearing his own language turned back on him, calm and unblinking, made him sit back down without another word. I opened the folder. This is a quitclaim deed, I said, sliding the first document into the middle of the table where the candlelight caught it. Filed with the Harris County Clerk's Office 8 months into my marriage. It transfers partial ownership of my house on Tierwester Street into a trust controlled by my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law. My signature is on it. I let that sit for a second. I never signed this. I've never even seen this document before 3 weeks ago. Mama Gloria's face had gone the color of the white tablecloth. And this, I continued, laying a second page beside it, is a printout of text messages between Layla and Darius, dated 6 weeks before our wedding. I looked at my wife. Long before I put a ring on your finger, you two were already talking about how to get access to what I had, and how you'd handle the family trust once you were legally my wife. This wasn't something that happened to our marriage. It's something that walked into it with you. The room shifted again. A different kind of silence now. Colder. This, I said, laying down a third page, is a renunciation of trustee letter, drafted and ready to be filed with the probate court. It would have removed me, quietly, permanently, from a position in Chief Raymond's estate that I didn't even know existed until 3 weeks ago. A murmur went through the table. An older man near the head, Chief Raymond's brother I would learn later, leaned forward, his brow furrowed deep. I reached back into the folder and pulled out the last item. A single sheet of paper, the handwriting on it unmistakably older, unmistakably careful. And this, I said, my voice catching for the first time all night, is a letter Chief Raymond wrote to me. My lawyer found it sealed in the probate file 3 weeks ago. He never got the chance to give it to me himself. I didn't read the whole thing out loud. I didn't need to. I told them what it said. That he'd watched how I treated Layla, how I treated Mama Gloria, long before the wedding. That he'd started to worry, quietly, about what his own daughter and wife might do once the estate came through. Worry he never said out loud to either of them because he loved them and hoped he was wrong. That he trusted me, a man he'd known such a short time, more than the family he'd known his whole life, and that he was sorry it had to be that way. Layla made a sound like the air had gone out of her. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Daddy never said anything about—" I watched something break in Layla that had nothing to do with the deed or the lawsuit. Her whole life, she'd measured her worth by staying close to power. Her father's money, her mother's approval, a version of respectability that never once asked whether she actually loved the people standing beside her. She hadn't set out to destroy me. She'd simply never been taught that loyalty had to cost her something to mean anything. In that letter, she wasn't just losing an inheritance. She was losing her father's last, quiet verdict on the kind of daughter she'd chosen to be. "Because you were never supposed to know," I said gently, not cruelly, just true. "Because the moment your mother and your brother found out, they started forging documents to erase my name before the ink on his will was even dry. Because I wasn't blood." I looked around the table, at faces now openly stricken. "Your mother said those exact words in this house, weeks ago, in Yoruba, thinking I couldn't understand her either." Mama Gloria's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and she caught the back of her chair, lowering herself into it without the composure she'd carried into the room an hour earlier. I turned to Layla one last time. This time she didn't reach for me. She didn't fall to her knees. She just sat there, very still, staring at the letter on the table, like it was something she couldn't quite bring herself to touch. "You knew," I said quietly. "Maybe not every detail, but you knew enough. You knew about the trust. You knew about the plan to cut me loose once the estate cleared. You sat across from me at breakfast every single morning, and you let me believe I was building a life with people who loved me." She didn't argue. She just looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, the fight finally gone out of her voice. "I don't know what to say," she said, barely above a whisper. "There's one more thing," I said, to the whole room now, because I needed them to hear this part most of all. "My lawyer filed everything with the Harris County District Attorney's Office on Friday. The forged deed, the renunciation letter, the recordings. That part isn't in my hands anymore. Texas law doesn't leave much room for forgiveness when it comes to forged, notarized documents filed with a court." Darius's face went slack, with something closer to panic than shame. "But there's something I decided on my own," I continued. "As co-trustee, and with emergency approval from the court-appointed special administrator now overseeing the contested estate, I've redirected $40,000 of what would have gone toward this family's private accounts into the Houston Nigerian Diaspora Youth Fund. For kids who grew up the way I did, without parents, without anyone in their corner." I paused. "Your father would have liked that a lot more than a bigger chandelier in this foyer." Mama Gloria let out a single, broken sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and put her face in her hands. An aunt near her reached out but didn't quite touch her, the way people hold back from someone they're no longer sure they recognize. I looked down at Layla one more time. She didn't beg, she just asked, quietly, "Is there anything I could say right now that would matter?" "No," I said, not unkindly. "Not tonight." "You spent 2 years thinking I couldn't understand your language," I said, to all of them now. "Tonight, you finally understand mine. Patience isn't weakness. It was never weakness. It was just me, waiting for the truth to have somewhere safe to land." I didn't touch anyone. I turned, picked my keys up off the side table by the door, and walked out of that house into the warm Sugarland evening, leaving nearly 20 relatives sitting in silence around a table, with a stain of spilled champagne spreading slowly across white linen. Behind me, I heard an older voice, Chief Raymond's brother, say quietly to no one in particular, The boy was right to stay silent as long as he did. I got in my truck. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, not driving yet, just breathing. Then I pulled out my phone one last time and played the recording back, start to finish, alone in the driveway, under a sky just beginning to turn orange with sunset. They laughed because they thought I couldn't understand. Stay with me for what happened once they realized how completely they'd been wrong. The weeks after that dinner moved fast, the way consequences tend to once truth finally gets loose in a room and can't be put back. The Harris County District Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into the forged quitclaim deed and the renunciation letter. Darius was the one named directly on both filings, his fingerprints, quite literally, on the notary stamp he'd arranged through a cousin who worked at a strip mall title office off the Southwest Freeway. Patricia told me the charges being considered included forgery of a government document and attempted probate fraud, both felonies under Texas law. Darius hired a lawyer of his own within a week. He stopped coming to family gatherings not long after that. Layla's claim to any disputed portion of her father's estate quietly dissolved under the weight of what the recordings, the deed, and the text messages showed. She moved back into her mother's house in Sugar Land, the same house with the circular driveway and the chandelier Mama Gloria used to polish twice a month, which now sat mostly dark most evenings, curtains drawn. I heard, through people who still talk to me, that the family stopped hosting their big Sunday dinners altogether. Mama Gloria, once the kind of woman who filled a room just by walking into it, reportedly started sending her housekeeper to do the grocery shopping instead of going herself, unwilling to run into anyone from church who'd heard even part of what happened that night. I didn't feel triumphant hearing any of that. I want to be honest with you about that too. Mostly I just felt tired, in the particular way a person feels after finally setting down something heavy they'd been carrying so long they forgot it had weight. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after that dinner. It was uncontested. There wasn't much left to fight over once the truth about the forged deed made clear exactly whose name belonged on the title to my house on Tiervester Street. The woman who had been my wife signed the papers without argument, and I remember thinking that was its own kind of answer. Getting my home back fully in my own name again felt smaller and quieter than I expected. No confetti, no dramatic moment, just a signature at a title company office on a Tuesday afternoon, and a clerk sliding a folder across the desk telling me congratulations in the same flat tone she probably used for every closing that day. I drove home afterward and sat on my own front porch for almost an hour, just looking at the hibiscus by the mailbox. The ones I'd planted because Layla said they reminded her of home. I dug them up that weekend. Not out of spite, just because it was time to plant something that reminded me of my own life again, not somebody else's memory of one. I took down the wedding photos from the hallway first, wrapping each frame carefully in an old towel before boxing them up. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they gleamed the way they had before Layla ever walked through that door. And on a Saturday morning in early May, I planted a young magnolia tree in the backyard, the kind that takes years to bloom properly, but is worth the wait once it does. My grandmother always said, "A tree planted in anger never grows straight." I made sure to plant that one in something closer to peace. A few weeks later, I met Nana Aisha for coffee at a little cafe on Almeida Road, not far from the house where she raised me. She was 72 now, her braids more silver than black, but her eyes still had that same sharp brightness I remembered from childhood afternoons at her kitchen table. She reached across the small table and took my hand in both of hers. "Your second pair of eyes," she said, smiling, "did exactly what I always hoped they would do. They saved you." She squeezed my fingers. "But eyes like that are meant for building, Otto, not just for seeing who's tearing you down." I told her about the youth fund donation and about Chief Raymond's letter, and she went quiet for a moment before nodding slowly, like something had settled into place for her, too. Then I told her something I hadn't fully decided until I said it out loud sitting across from her. I wanted to start something more permanent. Free Yoruba language classes for kids in 3rd Ward, twice a month at the community center on Elgin Street. The same kind of patient, kitchen table teaching she'd given me for 11 years, except this time offered to any child in the neighborhood whose family wanted them to have it. Nana Aisha's eyes went bright and wet at that, and she didn't try to hide it. Your grandfather would have been proud, she said. Chief Raymond would have been proud too, for what it's worth. He always did have good judgment about people, even when his own family didn't share it. I started the classes that June. 8 kids showed up the first Saturday, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the community center with notebooks in their laps. And I found myself teaching the exact same proverbs my grandmother had taught me, in the exact same patient rhythm, in a room full of children who had no idea how much that language had once meant to a grown man's survival. I wasn't rebuilding a marriage anymore. I was rebuilding something better, a version of family built on people who chose to show up, not people who happened to share blood or a wedding date. But there was one more piece of unfinished business waiting for me at a memorial gathering the family had already planned months earlier, before any of this ever came apart. A gathering honoring Chief Raymond, the one man in that family who had seen my worth before anyone else did. I almost didn't go. Stick around for what happened when I did. The memorial for Chief Raymond Adebayo was held on a warm Saturday afternoon in a banquet hall just off Highway 6 in Sugar Land. The kind of event the family had planned for months, long before any of what happened that Sunday night ever unfolded. Nearly 60 people filled the room, extended family, old business partners, members of the local Nigerian-American community who'd known Chief Raymond for decades. White orchids on every table, a framed photograph of him near the podium, dignified in a dark agbada, the same steady eyes I remembered from that patio conversation months before he passed. I almost didn't go. Part of me wondered if my presence would only reopen a wound the family was still trying to close. But Nana Aisha convinced me otherwise, her hand steady on my arm the morning of. "You don't go for them," she said. "You go for him. A man deserves to have the people he trusted stand in the room when his name is spoken." I walked in with my grandmother on one arm and Patricia a few steps behind, and I felt the room shift the moment people recognized me. A ripple of glances, whispered updates passed quickly from one relative to another. Mama Gloria sat near the front, thinner than I remembered, her usual poise replaced by something quieter and more careful. The woman who used to be my wife sat 2 rows back, eyes red-rimmed, not looking up when I passed. When it came time for family and close friends to share memories, I hadn't planned on speaking. But an uncle near the front gestured me forward, and something in me decided it was time. I stood at that podium and spoke first in Yoruba, slow and deliberate. The words Nana Aisha had given me over 11 patient years, finally serving their gentlest purpose yet. Rest well. We remember you rightly. Then I switched to English. My father-in-law taught me something in one conversation that most people never manage to teach in a lifetime, I said. He told me that blood doesn't make a family. Character does. That legacy isn't the size of an estate. It's what a person chooses to build with whatever they've been given. I held up the letter, folded now, worn soft at the creases from being read too many times. He wrote me something I only found a few months ago. He said he hoped he was wrong about the people closest to him. I think, in the end, he already knew he wasn't. I looked out at the room, at Mama Gloria, at Layla, at Darius sitting near the back with his eyes fixed on the floor. I used to believe I finally belonged somewhere, with people who saw me the way Chief Raymond did. I learned, in the hardest way a person can learn something, that not everyone in this room agreed with him. I let that settle, gently, without cruelty. But I'm not standing here to relitigate that. I'm standing here because he deserves better than to be remembered only for the mess that happened after he was gone. Layla's shoulders dropped. She didn't sob, didn't run. She simply stood, quietly, met my eyes for one long moment across the room, something between shame and understanding, and slipped out a side door without a word. Nobody stopped her. Mama Gloria stared down at her folded hands in her lap, and an aunt beside her simply reached over and held her arm, without either of them saying anything at all. "I forgive this family," I said, and I meant it. Though I want you to understand, forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It just decides not to let memory run your future. I don't forget what happened, but I choose peace over bitterness, because that's what Chief Raymond would have wanted, and honestly, because bitterness was never going to give me back a single day I lost being angry. I stepped down from that podium and walked back to my seat beside Nana Aisha, who took my hand and held it through the rest of the service without saying a word. She didn't need to. I already knew what she was thinking. Afterward, out in the parking lot under a wide Texas sky just beginning to turn gold, my grandmother squeezed my arm one more time. "They laughed," she said quietly, "because they thought you couldn't understand them. But it was your silence that understood everything, long before your voice ever needed to." I drove home to 3rd Ward that evening, past the magnolia tree in my backyard, its first small green buds just starting to show at the tips of its branches. I sat on my porch, the same porch where an old neighbor still raised 2 fingers off his rocking chair every evening I came home, and I felt something in my chest that had been missing for a very long time. Not triumph, just peace. Earned, patient, quiet peace. If you've ever been mocked, dismissed, or underestimated by people who assumed you'd never understand what they really thought of you, I want you to know that your silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful thing you own. This story reminds us that dignity is never proven in one dramatic evening. It's built in 100 ordinary Tuesdays nobody was watching. If someone in your life has made you feel like the help instead of family, you don't need a courtroom to take your peace back. Start smaller. Every Sunday after church, call the one friend who still speaks to you plainly and let her talk as long as she needs. Keep a small tin on your kitchen windowsill and drop in a folded slip of paper every time someone treats you with real respect that week. Read them all out loud on New Year's Eve, alone, with the good mug. If you're widowed, take the recipe box that still smells faintly of his handwriting and cook just one dish from it this Sunday. For yourself, not for company. You don't owe anyone your silence anymore. You only owe yourself your Tuesdays back. If this story moved you, comment "I understand" below, because somebody watching right now needs to know they aren't the only one who's ever sat quietly at a table like that. Like and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, self-respect, and the truth that always finds its way home in the end. The soul of these stories comes from human experience, empathy, and courage. AI assisted only in language refinement, so that timeless lessons of justice, compassion, and standing up against wrong could move and educate viewers everywhere. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.